The sun was sinking behind the dense canopy of trees as a group of friends approached the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Its wrought iron gates, twisted with rust and vines, loomed before them like the gaping maw of a beast waiting to devour them whole. Laura, the bravest of the group, pushed open the creaking gate, its hinges protesting with a sound that echoed through the still evening air. "Are you sure about this?" whispered Tim, his eyes darting nervously around the overgrown graveyard. "It's just a cemetery," Laura replied, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "Besides, we came all this way to see if the legends are true." The legends. Stories of vengeful spirits and cursed souls had surrounded the cemetery for generations. Villagers spoke in hushed tones about the place, warning outsiders to stay away, especially after dark. But curiosity, that insatiable itch for the unknown, had drawn Laura and her friends here tonight. They ventured deeper into the cemetery, the long shadows cast by the setting sun stretching ominously across the crumbling tombstones. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of damp earth and decaying leaves permeated their senses. The path, barely visible through the tangled weeds, seemed to wind endlessly into the heart of the graveyard. As they walked, an eerie silence enveloped them, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. It was as if the very ground beneath their feet was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a soft, chilling whisper floated on the breeze. "Turn back! Turn back!" The voice was faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to send shivers down their spines. "Did you hear that?" asked Sarah, her voice trembling. "It's just the wind," Laura said, though her own voice lacked conviction. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the gathering darkness. They pressed on, passing row after row of weathered tombstones, some so old the inscriptions were barely legible. Here lay the town's forgotten dead, their stories buried along with their bones. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very air was thick with the weight of sorrow and despair. Just as the last rays of sunlight vanished, they came upon an old, decrepit mausoleum. Its stone facade was cracked and covered in ivy, and an iron door, partially ajar, beckoned them inside. "Let's check it out," Laura suggested, her curiosity piqued. Tim hesitated. "I don't know, Laura. This place gives me the creeps." "Come on, just a quick look," she insisted, already moving towards the door. As they stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop even further. The narrow beam of Laura's flashlight revealed dusty shelves lined with urns and a few faded photographs. An inscription above the door read, "Here lie the restless souls." A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled to open it, but it was stuck fast. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the small space with an ethereal chorus. "Leave, or suffer our fate." The friends exchanged terrified glances. What had started as a harmless adventure was quickly becoming a nightmare. With their hearts pounding and fear clawing at their throats, they realized the truth in the villagers' warnings. Some places are better left undisturbed. The friends stood frozen in the darkness of the mausoleum, their breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Laura's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling around them like a malevolent wind. "Tim, try the door again," Laura ordered, her voice trembling. Tim's hands shook as he grasped the cold iron handle and pulled with all his might. The door creaked open just enough for them to squeeze through one by one, spilling out into the overgrown graveyard. The whispers followed, a chilling reminder that they were not alone. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something is very wrong." Laura nodded, her earlier bravado shattered. "Let's stick together and head back to the gate." As they made their way through the cemetery, the whispers became more distinct, carrying snippets of conversations and phrases that seemed impossibly familiar. "Remember the night? The accident? She shouldn't have been there. Why did you leave us?" The friends exchanged uneasy glances. How could these voices know such intimate details about their lives? "Did you hear that?" Tim asked, his face pale. "I heard it," Laura replied. "It's like they're talking to us, about us." Sarah clutched her arms, trying to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. "This place is cursed. We need to leave now." The path seemed longer and more winding than they remembered, as if the cemetery itself was conspiring to keep them trapped. The whispers grew louder, filling their ears with an unending stream of eerie, disembodied voices. "Don't leave us. Stay with us. Join us." Suddenly, they stumbled upon a small clearing where the moonlight broke through the trees and illuminated a single grave. The headstone was cracked and weathered, but the name etched into the stone was unmistakable: Sarah Johnson. Sarah's scream pierced the night. "That's my name! How can this be here?" Laura approached the grave cautiously. It must be a coincidence. There could be many Sarah Johnsons. "No," Sarah insisted, pointing to the dates on the stone. "Look at the birth date. That's my birth date." Fear gripped them as they realized this was no ordinary cemetery. It seemed to know them, to anticipate their arrival. The whispers turned into mocking laughter, echoing through the clearing. "We should never have come here," Tim muttered, backing away from the grave. Just then, an icy hand clamped down on Laura's shoulder. She spun around to find herself face to face with an old man dressed in tattered, antiquated clothing. His eyes were hollow, and his skeletal hand felt like death itself. "You should not be here," the phantom caretaker rasped, his voice a dry whisper like dead leaves rustling in the wind. "Leave now, while you still can." The friends recoiled in horror, but the caretaker's grip tightened. "The spirits here are restless. They will not let you leave so easily." Laura swallowed hard. "We didn't mean any harm. We just wanted to see if the legends were true." The caretaker's hollow eyes bore into hers. "The legends are true, and now you are part of them." With a sudden, forceful push, he released her. The friends turned and fled, the caretaker's warning ringing in their ears. As they ran, the whispers followed, growing louder and more frantic. "Leave. Leave. Before it's too late." They reached the gates, but the heavy iron bars would not budge. Panic set in as they pulled and pushed, desperate to escape the horrors behind them. "What's happening?" Tim cried. "Why won't it open?" Laura's mind raced. The caretaker said the spirits wouldn't let us leave. There must be a way to appease them. Sarah's eyes widened with realization. "The chapel. There might be something there that can help us." With no other options, they turned back towards the heart of the cemetery, the whispers now a constant, sinister presence. The friends knew they had to find a way to calm the restless spirits before the night consumed them entirely. Their hearts pounded as they made their way back into the cemetery's depths. The oppressive darkness seemed to press in from all sides, and the whispers transformed into a dissonant chorus that filled their minds with dread. The friends clung to each other, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "We need to find that chapel," Laura urged, her eyes darting around for any sign of the building. "It's our only hope." Tim nodded, his flashlight shaking in his hand as he scanned the area. It has to be around here somewhere. Just keep moving. As they stumbled through the tangled undergrowth, they caught glimpses of spectral figures flitting between the tombstones. The spirits were becoming bolder, their hollow eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Each step felt heavier, as if unseen hands were pulling them back, trying to drag them into the earth. There! Sarah pointed ahead, where the faint outline of the chapel loomed through the darkness. Its ancient stone walls were covered in ivy, and its tall, narrow windows were dark and foreboding. The friends quickened their pace, but as they neared the chapel, the phantom caretaker reappeared, blocking their path. His skeletal form seemed to glow with an unholy light, and his hollow eyes were filled with a sorrowful intensity. "You should not have returned," he intoned, his voice echoing through the night like a mournful wind. "The spirits here are not easily appeased." Laura stepped forward, trying to muster her courage. "We just want to leave. Please help us." The caretaker's gaze softened and he nodded slowly. "There is one way. Inside the chapel you will find an ancient manuscript. It contains the ritual needed to pacify the spirits. But beware, the spirits will do everything in their power to stop you." With a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped aside, allowing them to pass. The friends hurried into the chapel, their footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the faint glow of moonlight through the windows cast eerie shadows on the walls. Tim found a candle and lit it, its flickering flame casting a weak but welcome light. They spread out, searching the shelves and alcoves for the manuscript the caretaker had mentioned. As they searched, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the chapel with an almost tangible sense of dread. "Over here!" Sarah called, holding up a dusty, leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and worn, but the intricate symbols etched into the leather were unmistakable. Laura took the book and opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the ancient text. "This is it. It details the ritual we need to perform to calm the spirits. We need to find specific items from the graves and perform the ritual at the stroke of midnight." A sudden crash echoed through the chapel as the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The air grew colder, and the spectral figures began to materialize within the chapel, their eyes glowing with malevolence. "We don't have much time," Tim said, his voice trembling. "Let's get what we need and get this over with." They split up, each friend assigned to find a different item mentioned in the manuscript. The whispers became deafening, and the spirits grew more aggressive, their spectral forms lunging at the friends, trying to stop them from completing their task. Laura hurried to an ancient grave marked with the name of a long-dead priest, her hands shaking as she pried open the coffin to retrieve a relic. Tim scoured the nearby graves for a specific type of flower that only grew in the cursed soil. Sarah, meanwhile, ventured into the deepest part of the cemetery to find a stone marked with a strange symbol. The spirits fought them every step of the way, their ghostly hands grasping and pulling, their whispers now angry shouts. But the friends persevered, driven by their fear and determination to escape the cursed cemetery. As the clock struck midnight, they reconvened at the chapel, their hands full of the necessary items. Laura quickly laid out the relics and began to chant the ancient incantation from the manuscript. The air crackled with energy, and the spirits' screams filled the night, a cacophony of rage and sorrow. The ground trembled, and a blinding light filled the chapel. The friends closed their eyes against the intense brightness, continuing the chant until, suddenly, silence fell. The oppressive weight lifted and the whispers ceased. They opened their eyes to find the spirits gone, the chapel once again still and silent. The door creaked open, revealing the path back to the cemetery gates, now unobstructed. We did it, Sarah whispered, relief flooding her voice. Let's get out of here, Laura said, leading the way. They hurried back through the cemetery, the gates swinging open easily this time. As they crossed the threshold, they glanced back one last time. The phantom caretaker stood at the chapel door, his form slowly fading into the shadows. You have done well, his voice echoed faintly. The spirits are at peace. For now. With that, the friends turned and fled, vowing never to speak of the cursed cemetery again. The horrors they had faced would haunt them for the rest of their lives, a chilling reminder of the restless dead and the price of disturbing their eternal rest. The friends stumbled back through the cemetery, their nerves frayed but their spirits lifted slightly by their apparent success. The gate was in sight, the promise of safety just a few steps away. However, as they neared the exit, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. What now? Tim gasped, looking around in panic. The earth shook violently, and they were thrown to the ground. Laura's flashlight spun wildly, casting erratic beams of light that revealed a horrifying sight. Graves were opening all around them. Coffins burst from the soil, and skeletal hands clawed their way out of the earth. Run! Sarah screamed, scrambling to her feet. But there was nowhere to run. The cemetery was alive with the dead, skeletal figures rising from their graves, their empty eye sockets glowing with an otherworldly light. The friends huddled together, surrounded by the restless dead. Why is this happening? Laura cried, her voice breaking with fear. They're not at peace, Tim whispered, his eyes wide with terror. We didn't complete the ritual properly. The skeletal figures advanced, their bony fingers reaching out. One of them, a particularly menacing figure still dressed in tattered remnants of a military uniform, stepped forward. Its jaw moved as if trying to speak, but only a chilling hiss emerged. Laura frantically flipped through the manuscript, her hands shaking. There must be something we missed. A final step or... A skeletal hand shot out, grabbing Laura's wrist. She screamed, dropping the manuscript. Tim and Sarah tried to pull her free, but the grip was like iron. Help me! Laura cried, struggling against the skeletal hand. The ground continued to tremble, more graves opening, more skeletal figures rising. The friends were surrounded, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah noticed something glinting in the moonlight near one of the disturbed graves. A small, ornate box lay half buried in the soil. She ran to it, her heart pounding, and opened it to reveal a set of ancient coins and a scroll. Laura, I found something! Sarah shouted, rushing back to her friends. Laura snatched the scroll, unrolling it quickly. These coins, they're part of the ritual. We need to place them on the graves. Tim grabbed a handful of coins. Let's do it, quickly. They moved through the cemetery, placing a coin on each open grave. As they did, the skeletal figures began to retreat, their glowing eyes dimming. The ground stopped shaking, and an eerie silence fell over the cemetery. Finally, they placed the last coin. The remaining spirits let out a collective sigh, their forms dissolving into the night air. The earth closed over the open graves, leaving the cemetery once again still and silent. Exhausted and terrified, the friends hurried to the gate. This time it swung open easily, and they fled into the safety of the village, vowing never to return to the cursed cemetery again. The horrors they had faced would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the restless dead and the price of disturbing their eternal rest. The friends made it back to the village, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. As the sun began to rise, they could hardly believe they had survived the night. But the sense of relief was short-lived. Their curiosity about the chapel and its secrets lingered, and they knew they had to return despite their terror. A week passed before they gathered the courage to venture back to the cemetery. This time, they came prepared. Armed with flashlights, candles, and protective charms from a local witch, they hoped to unravel the final mysteries of the haunted chapel. As they approached the cemetery gates, the air grew colder, and a heavy silence descended upon them. The once locked gate swung open with a creak, as if inviting them back in. They walked the now familiar path to the chapel, their steps echoing in the stillness. The chapel loomed ahead, its stone walls dark and foreboding. The friends entered, lighting candles to illuminate the interior. The oppressive atmosphere was stronger than before, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over them. "We need to find out more about this place," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something here that we're missing." They spread out, examining the walls and floors for hidden clues. Tim found a hidden compartment in the altar, revealing a set of old keys and another manuscript, this one written in a different, more ancient language. "Look at this," Tim called, showing the manuscript to the others. "This must be the key to everything." Laura studied the manuscript, her eyes widening as she recognized the symbols. "These are instructions for a different ritual, one that involves the chapel itself." The friends gathered around the manuscript, their fear momentarily forgotten in their excitement. The new ritual required them to unlock a hidden crypt beneath the chapel and perform a ceremony to cleanse the land of its dark curse once and for all. "Let's do it," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to end this." Using the keys they had found, they unlocked a trapdoor in the floor of the chapel, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into the crypt. The air grew colder still as they descended, their candles flickering in the damp, musty air. The crypt was small and cramped, with stone sarcophagi lining the walls. In the center of the room stood an ancient altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. The friends approached it cautiously, their footsteps echoing eerily. Laura placed the manuscript on the altar and began to read the incantation aloud. The air hummed with energy, and a cold wind swept through the crypt. The friends joined hands, their voices trembling as they chanted the ancient words. As they completed the incantation, the ground beneath the altar trembled, and a deep, resonant sound filled the crypt. The sarcophagi began to glow with an unearthly light, and the spirits of those entombed within rose, their forms shimmering and transparent. One of the spirits, a tall figure dressed in ceremonial robes, stepped forward. "You have awakened us," he said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Why do you disturb our rest?" "We seek to lift the curse," Laura replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "We want to bring peace to this land, and to the spirits trapped here." The spirit regarded them with a piercing gaze. "The curse was placed by a powerful witch, betrayed and buried here against her will. To lift the curse, you must find her remains and perform the final ritual." The friends exchanged worried glances. They knew this was the most dangerous task yet. The spirit pointed to a hidden passage at the back of the crypt. "Her grave lies beyond. Be cautious, for her power still lingers." They entered the passage, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The air grew colder with each step, and the oppressive feeling of malevolence intensified. They knew they were nearing the source of the curse. Finally, they reached a small chamber. In the center lay a solitary grave, marked with strange symbols and surrounded by a faint, eerie glow. The friends gathered around, their breath visible in the icy air. "This is it," Laura whispered. "We need to be careful." With trembling hands, they began to clear away the earth, revealing the skeletal remains of the witch. Her bones were tangled with roots, and the air around her crackled with dark energy. Following the instructions from the manuscript, they arranged the protective charms and relics around the grave. Laura began the final incantation, her voice growing stronger with each word. The air grew tense, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. The witch's spirit rose from the grave, her eyes burning with anger. "You dare to disturb my rest," she hissed, her voice echoing with a mix of rage and sorrow. "We seek to lift the curse," Laura said, her voice unwavering. "We want to bring peace to this land, and to you." The witch's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. "Very well. Complete the ritual, and I shall grant you your wish." With renewed determination, the friends chanted the final words of the ritual. The chamber shook, and a powerful energy surged through them. The witch's spirit began to dissolve, her form turning to light and dispersing into the air. As the last echoes of the incantation faded, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the air grew warm and still. The friends collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. "We did it," Tim said, his voice filled with awe. The friends made their way back to the surface, the chapel now bathed in a soft, peaceful light. The curse had been lifted, and the spirits were finally at rest. They left the cemetery, the gate closing behind them with a sense of finality. The horrors they had faced would forever be etched in their memories, but they had triumphed over the darkness. The cursed cemetery was no more, and the friends knew they had done something truly extraordinary. They vowed never to return, leaving the cemetery to its newfound peace, and they carried with them the knowledge that they had faced the darkest of terrors and emerged victorious. The village seemed a world away from the horrors of the cemetery, but the friends could not shake the feeling of unease that lingered. They had lifted the curse, but the memory of the restless spirits haunted them, their hollow eyes and mournful whispers echoing in their minds. A month passed, and the friends began to feel the weight of their ordeal lessening. Life slowly returned to normal, but the bond they shared was now tempered by the shared trauma of their night in the cursed cemetery. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Laura received a phone call from Sarah. Her voice was shaky, tinged with panic. "Laura, I think something's wrong. I keep seeing things, hearing voices. It's like they're still with me." Laura's heart sank. "Sarah, it's probably just stress. We went through a lot." "No, Laura," Sarah insisted. "It's real. I can feel them." They decided to meet at the village square, bringing Tim along. When they gathered, the unease was palpable. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Tim seemed equally disturbed, admitting that he too had been experiencing strange occurrences. As they talked, a cold wind swept through the square, carrying faint whispers that sent chills down their spines. The friends exchanged worried glances, realizing that the spirits of the cemetery were not at peace after all. "We need to go back," Laura said, her voice resolute. "We must have missed something." Tim and Sarah nodded, their fear replaced by a grim determination. They prepared for their return to the cemetery, armed once more with protective charms and the ancient manuscript. As they approached the cemetery gates, the air grew cold and thick with the smell of damp earth. The gate, which had closed with finality before, now creaked open as if expecting them. The friends stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cemetery was eerily silent, but the oppressive atmosphere was back, stronger than ever. They followed the familiar path to the chapel, their footsteps echoing ominously. As they neared the building, the whispers began anew, louder and more desperate than before. Inside the chapel, they relit the candles, their flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. The manuscript lay on the altar, untouched since their last visit. Laura picked it up, scanning the pages for any clues they might have missed. "There has to be something here," she muttered, her eyes flicking over the ancient text. Tim's flashlight swept the room, landing on a section of the wall that seemed different. He approached, running his fingers over the stone. "There's something here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A hidden compartment." They worked together to open the compartment, revealing a hidden recess containing a small, ornate box. Inside the box were several ancient relics and another scroll, this one in the same ancient language as the manuscript. Laura unrolled the scroll, her eyes widening as she read. This is it. The final step to truly lift the curse and bring peace to the spirits. The ritual was more complex than they had imagined, involving the creation of a sacred circle within the chapel and the invocation of the spirits to grant them rest. The friends set to work, following the instructions meticulously. As they completed the circle and began the incantation, the air grew colder, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices. The spirits materialized around them, their forms more solid and terrifying than before. The friends held their ground, chanting the ancient words with increasing intensity. The spirits advanced, their eyes filled with sorrow and rage. But as the ritual continued, a change began to take place. The anger in the spirits' eyes softened, replaced by a look of profound relief. The room filled with a blinding light, and the spirits began to dissolve, their forms dissipating into the air. As the last echoes of the incantation faded, the chapel was filled with an overwhelming sense of peace. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the cold wind ceased. The friends collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. The next morning, they left the cemetery for the final time, the gate closing behind them with a sense of true finality. The curse had been lifted, and the spirits were at rest. In the days that followed, the friends found their lives returning to normal. The strange occurrences ceased, and the memory of the cemetery began to fade. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, knowing they had done something extraordinary. But the bond they shared would forever be marked by the horrors they had faced together, a reminder of the restless dead and the price of disturbing their eternal rest. They vowed never to forget the lessons they had learned, and to respect the dead in their final resting places. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a semblance of normalcy for Laura, Tim, and Sarah. Yet, the eerie memories of their encounters with the restless spirits continued to haunt them. Each night brought dreams that were more vivid and disturbing, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. One evening, as Laura sat alone in her room, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as if the very air had thickened, and the room grew cold. Her vision blurred, and suddenly she was no longer in her bedroom. She found herself standing in the cemetery, but it was different, more vibrant, alive with the sights and sounds of the past. Laura watched in horror as she witnessed a scene unfold before her eyes. She saw the cemetery caretaker, the same spectral figure who had warned them, alive and well, tending to the graves. A group of townspeople approached him, their faces twisted with anger and fear. "You betrayed us!" one of them shouted. "You brought this curse upon us!" The caretaker's face was a mask of sorrow and guilt. "I did what I had to do," he replied, his voice trembling. "The witch's power was too great. We had no choice but to bury her here." Laura felt a wave of sympathy for the caretaker, understanding now that he had been caught in a terrible situation. As the vision faded, she found herself back in her room, her heart pounding. The next day, she met with Tim and Sarah to share what she had experienced. To her surprise, they had similar stories to tell. Each had been visited by visions of the past, witnessing the events that led to the curse. "I saw the witch," Tim said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was betrayed by the very people she tried to protect. They feared her power and turned on her." Sarah nodded, her face pale. "And I saw the townspeople, their regret and guilt after they realized what they had done. They were haunted by their actions, just as we are now." The friends knew they had to return to the cemetery one last time to understand the full story. Armed with this new knowledge, they hoped to finally lay the spirits to rest and free themselves from the haunting visions. As they entered the cemetery, the air grew cold and heavy once more. The whispers began, but this time they were different, softer, tinged with sorrow rather than anger. The friends followed the familiar path to the chapel, where they set up their candles and protective charms. They stood in a circle, holding hands, and began to chant an incantation they had discovered in the final pages of the manuscript. The air shimmered, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When it faded, they found themselves transported back in time, standing in the midst of the events that had cursed the cemetery. They watched as the witch, a woman with striking features and eyes filled with wisdom, was dragged to the cemetery by the terrified townspeople. She did not resist, her gaze calm and resigned. "You fear what you do not understand," she said softly. "But know this, your actions will bring a curse upon this land. The spirits will not rest until the truth is revealed." The townspeople ignored her warnings, burying her alive in a makeshift grave. The ground trembled, and a dark energy seeped into the earth, binding the spirits to the cemetery. As the vision ended, Laura, Tim, and Sarah found themselves back in the present, the weight of the past heavy upon them. They realized that the witch had not cursed the land out of malice, but as a warning of the consequences of fear and ignorance. "We need to perform one last ritual," Laura said, her voice determined. "We have to acknowledge the truth and ask for forgiveness." They gathered around the witch's grave, placing their hands on the earth. With tears in their eyes, they spoke words of apology and understanding, vowing to remember the lessons they had learned. The ground beneath them glowed with a soft light, and the air grew warm. The whispers ceased, replaced by a sense of profound peace. The friends felt the spirits finally moving on, their restless souls finding the solace they had long sought. As they left the cemetery for the final time, the gate closed gently behind them. The horrors they had faced were now a part of their past, but they knew they had brought peace to the cursed land. They had uncovered the truth and set the spirits free, breaking the cycle of fear and ignorance that had bound them for so long. The friends walked away, their hearts lighter, knowing they had done something truly extraordinary. The visions of the past would no longer haunt them, and the lessons they had learned would guide them for the rest of their lives. Though they had laid the spirits to rest, a lingering sense of unfinished business weighed on Laura, Tim, and Sarah. The witch's final warning still echoed in their minds, and they felt an unspoken agreement to return to the cemetery one last time. They needed to confront the witch herself and understand the true depth of her curse. Equipped with the manuscript, protective charms, and a renewed determination, the friends ventured back to the cemetery. The night was eerily quiet, and the moon cast a ghostly glow over the gravestones. The gate swung open with an almost welcoming creak as they stepped inside. They walked to the witch's grave, their flashlights illuminating the path. The air was cold, and a faint, sorrowful whisper seemed to echo through the cemetery. The friends gathered around the grave, their breaths visible in the chill. "We need to perform the final ritual," Laura said, opening the manuscript to the last page. "This one will summon the witch's spirit and allow us to speak with her." Tim and Sarah nodded, their faces set with determination. They formed a circle around the grave, placing the protective charms in a pattern as described in the manuscript. Laura began to chant the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. The air grew colder, and a mist began to rise from the ground. The friends held their breath as the mist coalesced into the form of the witch. Her eyes glowed with an ethereal light, and her presence filled the cemetery with a powerful, ancient energy. "You have come to seek the truth," the witch said, her voice soft yet commanding. "You wish to understand the curse that binds this land." Laura stepped forward, her eyes meeting the witch's. "We want to know why you placed the curse and how we can truly lift it." The witch's gaze softened and she nodded. "I was betrayed by those I sought to protect. Their fear and ignorance led to my unjust death. In my final moments, I cast a curse not out of hatred, but as a warning. The spirits of this cemetery were bound by their own guilt and fear, unable to find peace." Tim spoke up, his voice trembling. "We've seen the visions. We know what happened. We just want to bring peace to this place and to you." The witch's form flickered and she sighed deeply. "The final step to lifting the curse is simple, yet profound. You must acknowledge the pain and suffering caused by ignorance and fear. Only through understanding and forgiveness can the curse be broken." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "We understand. We will do whatever it takes." The friends joined hands, forming a circle around the witch's grave. They closed their eyes and spoke words of apology, understanding, and forgiveness. As they chanted, the air grew warm, and a gentle breeze swept through the cemetery. The witch's form began to dissolve into the mist, her expression one of peace and relief. "You have done well. The curse is lifted, and the spirits are at rest. Remember the lessons you have learned and carry them with you." With a final serene smile, the witch's spirit vanished, leaving the friends standing in the quiet, moonlit cemetery. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. They left the cemetery, the gate closing gently behind them. As they walked back to the village, they felt a profound sense of closure. The curse had been lifted, not through force or magic, but through understanding and compassion. In the days that followed, the friends found their lives returning to a state of normalcy. The strange occurrences ceased, and the visions of the past faded. They had faced their fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. The bond they shared was stronger than ever, tempered by the trials they had endured together. They knew that the lessons they had learned would guide them for the rest of their lives, reminding them of the power of understanding, forgiveness, and compassion. The cursed cemetery was now a place of peace, its restless spirits finally at rest. The friends had done something truly extraordinary, and they carried the memory of their journey with them, a testament to the strength of their bond and the resilience of the human spirit. The tranquility that followed the lifting of the curse was short-lived. Laura, Tim, and Sarah began experiencing strange occurrences once more. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, whispers followed them in the night, and vivid dreams of the cemetery haunted their sleep. They realized with a sinking dread that their ordeal was not yet over. There was one final task they had to complete, to escape the grasp of the cemetery once and for all, or be doomed to remain entangled in its dark legacy forever. The friends gathered in Laura's living room, the flickering candlelight casting long, ominous shadows. "We have to go back," Laura said, her voice firm but her eyes reflecting her fear. "We need to make sure the curse is completely lifted, or we might never be free of this." Sarah hugged herself tightly, shivering despite the warmth of the room. What if we're making it worse by going back? Tim shook his head, his expression resolute. We've come this far. We can't stop now. We need to see this through to the end. With heavy hearts, they prepared for what they hoped would be their final journey to the cemetery. Armed with the manuscript, their protective charms, and a renewed determination, they set out once more under the light of a waning moon. The cemetery was eerily quiet as they entered, the gate creaking ominously behind them. The air was thick with anticipation, and an uneasy stillness settled over the graveyard. They made their way to the heart of the cemetery, where the chapel loomed like a silent sentinel. Inside the chapel, the oppressive atmosphere was back, stronger than ever. The candles flickered wildly as if disturbed by an unseen presence. The friends stood in a circle, holding hands, their breaths coming in short, fearful gasps. "We need to finish this," Laura said, opening the manuscript to the final page. "We need to confront whatever is holding us here and break free." As they began to chant the final incantation, the ground beneath them trembled and the air grew colder. Shadows gathered in the corners of the chapel, coalescing into dark, ghostly forms. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. "Why have you returned?" a voice boomed, echoing through the chapel. The phantom caretaker appeared, his hollow eyes burning with a fierce light. "You have lifted the curse, but you are not yet free." Laura stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. "We need to know what else we must do to escape this place. We've done everything the manuscript said." The caretaker's expression softened and he nodded slowly. "You have done well, but there is one final test. You must confront your deepest fears and prove your resolve. Only then will you be truly free." The friends exchanged worried glances, but knew there was no turning back. They stood firm, their hands tightly clasped, as the caretaker began to chant in a language older than time itself. The shadows surged forward, enveloping the friends in darkness. Laura found herself alone in a desolate landscape, the ground cracked and barren. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant echo of her own fears. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to face whatever lay ahead. Tim stood in a forest of twisted, gnarled trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The shadows whispered his deepest fears, taunting him with visions of failure and despair. He clenched his fists and pressed on, knowing he had to overcome his doubts. Sarah found herself in a maze of mirrors, each one reflecting a different aspect of her fears. The reflections twisted and distorted, showing her worst nightmares. She steeled herself and navigated the maze, determined to find her way out. As they faced their fears, the friends felt a surge of strength and resolve. They understood that the cemetery's hold on them was not just a physical one, but a manifestation of their deepest insecurities and doubts. One by one, they conquered their fears and emerged from the darkness, finding themselves back in the chapel. The caretaker smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and relief. "You have done it. You have faced your fears and proven your strength. The cemetery's hold on you is broken." The shadows dissipated, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and finality. The friends embraced, tears of relief and joy streaming down their faces. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. As they left the cemetery for the final time, the gate swung closed behind them with a soft, reassuring click. The horrors they had faced were now a part of their past, but they knew they had conquered their fears and broken free from the curse. The friends walked away, their hearts light and their spirits lifted. They had done something truly extraordinary, and they carried the memory of their journey with them, a testament to their courage and resilience. The cursed cemetery was no more, and they were finally free.